Good evening. Welcome on in to our release party, live stream, celebration. I don't know what we want to call it of the 37th edition of Ron Chandler's Baseball Forecaster. I am Ryan Bloomfield. I'll be your host this evening as we just kind of go through and talk about this year's book as we look at some of the new research that we've done for this year, and as we talk about some of our favorite player boxes and Ron Chandler's introduction, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So looking forward to an hour-ish of forecaster fun, as all of us have been working through all of, I don't know, October, half of November, and so on and so forth to get this thing out. And it sounds like it's hit the mail stream. Most, if not all, pre-orders have it. I say if not all because I still don't, but that's okay. I'm not that important. I'm going to introduce our esteemed group tonight. First and foremost with Ron Chandler. Ron, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Ryan, for putting this all together. This will be fun.
Congratulations on your, I think, is this the first ever New York Met that has graced the cover?
Yes. I've been waiting for this for 37 years. I mean, Francisco Lindor and Max Scherzer have been on in other uniforms, but this is the first time New York Metropolitan in Mets gear has graced our cover, and I couldn't be happier to see the polar bear doing it for us this year.
In retrospect, we picked the wrong Met. It should have been Steve Cohen.
with dollar bills floating everywhere around him.
Yes,
the way this off season is going. I do wonder, and I'm going to bring in Brent Hershey, who actually does the cover design as well as a bunch of the, of course, in between the covers. Ron, how much did you have to twist Brent's arm to finalize Alonso and get that set on the cover?
It really wasn't too bad this year. We've had some battles in the past, but it seems that there's been a push to get the Ronald Acuna on the cover for the past couple of years, and we haven't been able to do that. So that was the only controversy we had. But and finding the right Alonso picture was a bit of a struggle this year. But I think we settled on a good one.
Yeah, it was finding the right image is always a challenge. You can have the play, you know the player you want, but you got to find the right image that kind of wraps it all up. I think we did a good job again.
Absolutely. And Brent, you are so you've got one book down, this one, and are you kind of midway through your next one with a minor league baseball analyst?
Yeah. The writing of it right now is we're collecting all those reports from our team. There's several essays that are going in there. But yes, this is December is kind of the MLBA month, and we send that off to the printer around the first week in January.
Very good. And I'm sure we'll do, I know that in recent years, we've done something similar with you and Chris Blessing, who heads up our prospect team. We'll do something similar for that release as well. Next up, Ray Murphy. Ray, you did a 2-hour transaction recap on Baseball HQ Radio yesterday. Have the pipes recovered?
Yeah, I feel okay, but I'm glad you're carrying the lead role tonight. I don't have to do that, Ryan, because that took a little bit of time to recover from yesterday. PD put me through the full car wash of the winter meetings.
I did something similar last night with Bubba on our Bubba and the Bloom podcast, and we basically just stopped halfway through and said, "We'll finish this next week."
PD was pushing. We got to like the relievers, and like on the break, he said, "We'll just fly through the relievers." So I thought we were kind of done, and then he was asking me for like intelligent opinions about Miguel Castro, and I'm like, "I got nothing. Sorry."
Yeah. That's hilarious. So those who don't know, Ray and Brent are the editors. One of Ray's main tasks for the forecaster, one of many of his main tasks, are the actual projections and building the projections that you see in the forecaster as well. So that's a big piece. And I believe the projections for HQ subscribers are coming up next few days, this weekend, something like that.
Yeah, I was advertising Friday, and I'm probably a little bit behind schedule, so it'll be Friday or over the weekend sometime for sure.
You can always just say next Friday or something. Any upcoming.
I think there would be a mutiny at this point. It's important to throw the stake in the ground to hold myself accountable. So I'm trying to stick to it.
Last but not least, a new face to the live stream, to the release party of recent years, but not to HQ, is Ed DeCaria, who's been heading our research team for, I don't know, quite some time. Ed did a fantastic playing time essay that he'll run through tonight, but so we brought him along because it was, I think, groundbreaking enough to warrant a good chunk of tonight's program. So Ed, how you doing tonight?
Doing great.
Cool. All right. Anyone watching on our YouTube channel, feel free to, so just a couple housekeeping things. Feel free to first like and subscribe. This is on our Baseball HQ YouTube channel. We're doing a little bit more video and stuff like that this off season, this draft season, I should say. So if you don't mind, like and subscribe. And then we want this to be interactive. So we've got a whole kind of Q&A portion carved out as we go. But if you also want to leave questions as each speaker is going through their portion, feel free to add that in the YouTube chat, and I'll get to those, and we'll answer anything that comes up. If you're curious about, I don't know, a specific player, the process behind the scenes, any of that stuff is pretty much fair game. So what we've got on store tonight is we're going to start with Ron, as we pretty much always do. And Ron's going to go through what he calls Phoenix, which is his introductory essay for the 23 forecaster. Then we're going to go on to the aforementioned research that Ed has done on playing time measurement, which I think is just, again, really, really amazing stuff. So he's going to take you through some of that. And then some of our favorite player boxes, which is one of my favorite parts of this. It goes through not only just the players themselves, but the process of how we actually read a box and get to a conclusion that we get to in writing these up. And then again, last but not least, but Q&A. So again, feel free to keep those comments, questions going in the YouTube chat throughout the evening. All right, Ron, I'm going to hand this one over to you. I'm going to run the slides, so I will try to sync this up as best I can, but give you the floor to talk about your intro essay here.
Yeah, you can pop up the all those bullet points on that first slide all together. That's fine.
That makes my job easier.
Yeah. Nope. Okay, there we go. So the introduction this year I entitled Phoenix because even though this is the first off season in several years where we're basically unaffected by a pandemic or labor strife, there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to calculating the projections and seeing exactly what's going to be going on this coming season, because we're still analyzing last year's rule changes. I mean, we're only basically into year 3 essentially of the universal DH, 2020, and then skipped 2021, and last year 2022 it came back. So as much as we're trying to draw conclusions from that, it's still really a very small data sample from which for us to draw those conclusions. So it'll be a whole new set of designated hitters in the National League in 2023. So we're still trying to work our way through that and trying to figure things out. And now in 2023 coming up, Major League Baseball is handing us just a whole bunch of rule changes that can potentially significantly impact the numbers that we're going to see next season. And one of the reasons I've called this introduction Phoenix is that there are so many changes and there's so much opportunity for potential chaos that we want to see this game rise above the destruction that could be at the end of the season. We may not be able to recognize the numbers at all based on our expectations and history and what we normally see each year. There are a lot of things going on. So I want to go through each of them in a little bit of detail one by one. You can go to the next. Okay, first, the new balanced schedule. A lot of analysts believe that this may have the biggest impact on the numbers next year. I probably wouldn't go that far, but there are going to be some significant changes. You think about somebody like Aaron Judge, who hit 62 home runs last year, facing all the teams in the tough American League East. He's going to be facing a lot lesser competition next year because 24 of those games are going to be spread out among Central Division teams, which are much weaker. And you kind of wonder what kind of effect that'll have on his numbers. And there were a lot of players who could potentially be affected by that. And I know one that Ray probably read and maybe got a little bit excited about. I mean, Nick Pivetta, here's a guy who against the Yankees and the Rays and the Blue Jays last year, he had an ERA of like 7.5 against those three teams. And against the rest of every other team, his ERA was 2.95. So when you think about, he probably will get maybe 3 or 4 fewer starts against those three teams next year. That could pop up. That could improve his ERA by maybe half a run, get that ERA under 4 for he normally has an ERA over 4, get his ERA under 4. That's going to potentially change his value next year in the drafts. So, and again, a lot of this is just speculative. I mean, we're looking at these changes and we're seeing what might happen, but we don't know for sure. So you have to look at it. That's why it's speculating on the impact of these changes, because we don't know for sure. We're kind of taking educated guesses based upon what we expect is going to go on. So think about okay, the pitch clock. Let's look at the pitch clock. Next year, pitchers are going to be allowed 15 seconds between pitches with runners bases empty and 20 seconds when there are runners on base. Now, the average typically has been a little bit higher than that. And there are some pitchers that have been significantly higher over time. Now, for pitchers, one of the slowest workers has been Shohei Ohtani, who has been averaging over 21 seconds per in between pitches. And we have a listing of some of those the slowest pitchers there, guys like Luis Garcia, Corbin Burns, Michael Kopech, Yu Darvish. They're all taking 21 seconds or over between their pitches. And now we're going to have to speed things up. What's going to be the impact? Will it throw off their timing? Will they be able to adjust quickly? I think with starting pitchers, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. But I worry a little bit more about relief pitchers who are all-out effort types of guys. And some of them take an extraordinary amount of time between their pitchers. And with these relievers, you have to think about if they have to adjust to this pitch clock, are they going to change their delivery in order to not pitch with max effort? Is that going to affect their effectiveness? So these are considerations we have to think about. And some pitchers like Aroldis Chapman, like Hunter Strickland, like Devin Williams, these guys have typically take 25 seconds or more between their pitches. With runners on base, Devin Williams, Giovanni Gallegos, Kenley Jansen, over half a minute between pitches. And now they'll have to cut that down by 10 seconds. So you have to wonder how guys like these are going to adjust. And we don't know what the answer to that is. They could continue to throw with max effort, which possibly opens them up to potential injury issues. We don't know, but these are considerations. And in the introduction, I identify some of these pitchers who you should at least have on your radar as potential problems. I mean, if they are unable to adjust. So something else to think about. Next, the impact of bigger bases. This, I think, is the change that's potentially going to have the biggest effect on the numbers next year. When they tested the larger bases out in the minor leagues, stolen bases soared. And not just because of the bigger bases, but on top of it all, another rule that's tied in with this is that pitchers now can only throw over twice to first base to try to hold runners on. That third throw over has to catch the runner or it's a balk. So when you think about this now, it's going to become a cat and mouse game between the pitchers and the base runners, trying to between working down that pitch clock and taking a big enough lead. I can see situations where the guy's going to take a lead at first base. is going to wait for that pitch clock to tick down 3, 2, 1 and just take off, especially if he's been thrown over twice already. It's going to be almost like a gimme stolen base in situations like that. The larger base, I think, and I think this is kind of interesting, in context, the base is going to be 18 inches. Before they were 15 inches. The actual distance that's going to be closer between first and second base, for instance, is 4.5 inches. And thinking about 4.5 inches in context, it doesn't seem so much. And I was trying to kind of give a little bit of contextual feel for what 4.5 inches is. So, I mean, the diameter of a compact disc is 4.5 inches. A common household sponge, 4.5 inches, the long side. And I read about a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. I didn't have one of those, but Hunt's tomato sauce does just as well. So that the size of this can, that's 4.5 inches. So that's the distance that we're talking about here. One thing I didn't write about in the introduction, and I probably should have, is that the distance from home plate to first base is also going to be a little bit shorter. It's not going to be 4.5 inches. It's only going to be about 2 inches. So the short side of a sponge. And you think about all those close bang bang plays at first base, there may be a lot more hits legged out. So between more runners on base, potentially, the shorter distance between first and second base. Now you take a look at all the runners. Those guys who used to be successful 70, 75% of the time, maybe now we're going to be successful 80% of the time. And for those teams that look at 80% as the benchmark for a success rate in order to be valuable to their team, now suddenly there's a pool of more players who could potentially be given the green light. I've made it just kind of a gut prediction in the book that we might see a good many more 50 stolen base guys this year. In the past few years, we've been putting a higher value on guys who steal bases in the first round, in auctions, giving them a few dollars extra more. I don't know that we may have to do that in 2023, because I think there are going to be a lot more stolen bases to go around. So there won't be as big of a premium, the whole supply and demand balance that we've been playing all these years. So I think the bigger base is probably going to have the big impact. And last thing are the banning the shift. This I think potentially could have some impact, but I think it's more going to be on a player-by-player basis, because as much as the shift is going to be banned and the infielders need to be on either side of second base and on the infield, off the outfield grass, on the dirt, I think teams are still going to try to play with that a little bit. Shortstop might play really close to second base. The second baseman, might move over a little bit. Even the outfield might shift a little bit to kind of offset some of the loss of that advantage that the defense used to have. But we don't know how much that's going to affect. Is Joey Gallo suddenly going to become a 270 hitter? I don't think that's going to happen. But I think if we can identify some players who are good contact hitters, were shifted against a lot last year, and perhaps hit the ball on the ground a lot, those guys might maybe see a 10 or 15 point increase in their batting averages next year. We don't know. But here's the thing, looking at these variables, and here's where I think it all goes off the rails. Normally, when you try to determine why things happen in this game, why a pitcher's ERA goes up, why a player's batting average goes down, we can normally identify the variables that affect these changes. But in research, we normally like to have a control group and a test group and a test variable. And in this way, we can determine how much that test variable affects the results. But now when we have 4 variables in here, it could be complete chaos. If a pitcher's ERA goes up, we won't know whether that's because He wasn't able to adjust to the pitch clock, or the bigger bases increased stolen bases, put more runners in scoring position, or the shift affected it. If a player's batting average goes up, we don't know whether it's because of the pitcher's inability to adjust to the pitch clock, or there's so many things that could happen next year. And as a result of that, I think it's going to be really hard to determine why certain things occur, why certain players see perhaps radical shifts in their numbers next year. It's completely possible that there may be a good number of players who by the end of the season, their statistics might not look anything like we've come to expect over the past few years. So it's a challenge, especially for us doing the projections here. As far as this year's book, we've made a few adjustments to certain players based on some of these variables, but really haven't touched projections that much because we just don't know. So it all bears watching, and we'll see what happens. That's all I got.
Got a comment that you're scaring the audience, Ron. We just don't know, but it's true.
It's true. What are you going to do?
And the interesting thing that you mentioned too is, like, I don't know if we'll know next year, like you said, to that confluence of 3 or 4 different variables.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to pinpoint which one. And actually, one of the questions that I was going to put you and Ray on the spot in terms of the projections, I was going to ask if in this year's book with the projections, did we account for any of these, or did we just kind of throw up our hands and say we don't know?
There are a few players who I looked at their numbers, and I'm kind of the last line of defense when these player boxes come through. And if there were certain things that just kind of jumped out on me, I nudged the numbers a little bit, not all that much. But one player we'll be talking about a little later is someone that bears looking at, I think. But for the most part, the projections are pretty straight from what we've done in the past.
I don't know if this is right, but Tom Mulhall posted in the comments that maybe with those 4.5 inches, Yordan Alvarez might be the first 50-50 player.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Fascinating stuff. It's certainly going to be a different product on the field, and that's probably a whole other live stream contest thing. But certainly changes to our fantasy game, and I agree. I think the bases in the running game, bases / throw over limit, fantasy wise, is going to be huge. It's just I agree. Yeah. We don't know what that's going to look like. So we still have a full audience, so you didn't scare them off too much, Ron.
Good.
But appreciate that insight. And again, if anyone skips over that intro paragraph and goes right to the player boxes in the Baseball Forecaster, you're making a mistake. So check out Ron's intro every year, but this year specifically, really good stuff. So, all right, man, we are going to pivot over to Ed DeCaria, who's going to talk about the future of playing time measurement and how that starts now. And again, I just think, and maybe I'm stealing your thunder a little bit, Ed, but so much, and you mentioned this in the piece, but so much of our analysis goes on, barrel rate and exit velocity of 95 mile an hour, hard hit ball. So much goes into the skills, and we've made some great strides metric wise with that. But the playing time side, we kind of just shun away. So I'll kind of prep that for you and let you kind of explain what you dove into with playing time measurement in this book.
Sure. Yes. The future of playing time measurement starts right now with this book, with this essay. Not really, but so there's a buzzword in fantasy baseball in our industry for the last couple of years. It's volume is the word. You guys probably hear it in a bunch of podcasts. You probably see it in a bunch of articles. I don't recall ever hearing that word until about like 2019 or something like that. But it's just been everywhere lately. And volume is sort of our secret code word in the industry for accumulating more playing time, which we want, fantasy managers to do, because you accumulate more playing time, you accumulate more counting stats, and the theory goes you win more fantasy championships. But the problem with chasing volume is that it's not only really hard to guess, forecast, who's going to get more playing time, if you just look backwards, we have a very, very poor understanding of who has actually even gotten playing time or how they've gotten playing time. We have plate appearances and we have games. And if we want to get fancy, we can divide plate appearances by games to get like plate appearances per game. But that has all sorts of kind of nonsensical noise in there between like starting and, you know, coming off the bench and things like that. So this is a problem that's been just driving me crazy for a long, long time, like probably a decade or more. And I finally kind of was able to put together a way to, I wouldn't say completely solve it, because as you'll see at the end of this presentation, I think this is just kind of the beginning, but we had to start somewhere. So this is where we started. So the key to all of this is the first metric that's on this list. We have 6 total new metrics. Some are a little more important than the others, but they all kind of work together to tell a story. So the one that drives all of this is a metric called active weeks. And I'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail. And that plays really nicely with the metric called plate appearances per active week. So those two things together, you basically multiply active weeks times plate appearances per active week, and you basically get total plate appearances. There's this whole ghost plate appearances thing, which I'm not going to get into at all. Read the essay. But that is effectively how you break down total plate appearances into something a little more useful. And then within plate appearances per week, that kind of neatly breaks down into a couple other more interesting kind of nuggets in the form of starts per active week, plate appearances per start, and then similarly to the ghost PA thing, there's this extra PA per week that is kind of used to make the math work out, but it's also kind of interesting in its own right. So if you flip to the next slide, Ryan, I want to just walk through an example. So again, with all these metrics and without these metrics, you really are flying pretty blind. So on this chart is a list of 6 players, all of whom had exactly 558 plate appearances. And up until we show metrics like these new metrics, you have no real idea like how they got to that level. And 558, that's it's a pretty good overall plate appearances number. Like you take that, you know, in a mixed league. As you go a little deeper, things get even more crazy, right? Because it's just once you get into like the 300 plate appearance land, the 400 plate appearance land, like some of these differences are pretty significant. So just picking off a few examples, right? So Nick Castellanos, he missed 4 weeks with I can't remember what, but when he was like on the roster, on the active roster, he had like an ultra elite starts per week. He actually didn't get that many plate appearances per start, but that's kind of his path to 558. Mike Ostremski had a very, very different path to 558. He plays for the Giants, which we'll touch on in a second, but he didn't even start 5 games per week. So he was pretty much consistently missing at least 1 game per week. He also didn't have that many plate appearances per start either, but he kind of made up ground on Castellanos, for example, because he actually only missed 2 weeks with, I think it was COVID, instead of 4 weeks with an injury. And he also kind of sneakily got 1 or 2 extra plate appearances per week just coming in off the bench. So that was his path. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can compare it to like Yandy Diaz, who has a very different path himself, where he definitely was not amongst like the most starts per week on average, starts per active week on average, but he actually got a lot of plate appearances per start. So all this is to show that there's a whole level of richness beneath like a total plate appearances number that is just really, really ripe for exploration and knowledge, is just to really help you understand without having to click a link to go to a player profile page and read the story of his season in words. You can just see it in 6 little numbers that kind of tell you what kind of happened for that player for that year. So we'll dive into the individual metrics a little bit here. Happy to kind of answer questions about each of them. I'm going to kind of go a little bit surface level. Again, you can read the essay to get a little bit more depth. But so active weeks again was the big one. This is the thing that's been driving me crazy for a long time. You would think it would be easier just to understand, like, was a player on, or like how often were they on the roster or not? But it's actually really, really hard. So you basically need transaction logs, and then you need to just kind of get some sense of like, were they or were they not on the active roster? We use Mondays and opening day to kind of determine whether or not they were like active for that week. And the theory is that you as a fantasy manager have to make a decision on Monday. I know not everyone's leagues are on Mondays, but we had to pick a number. And for the most part, whether you pick Monday or Tuesday or Friday, it doesn't really matter. Active weeks will generally within like plus or minus one will be about the same for that player. So we have to get all the transaction logs, and then we have to kind of write our own kind of custom rules to decide, does that make the player active this week or deactivated this week? And that's just a really big hot mess. But once you solve for that, kind of everything else kind of clicks into place. So what I really like about active weeks is that it just normalizes players across usage patterns. So you could be like an everyday player for your team and I'll start all 27, sorry, not start, but be active for all 27 weeks and get like 700 plus plate appearances. Or you can actually be active on your team's roster for 27 weeks and only get 121 plate appearances, as a player did this year. I think it was Garrett Stubbs, backup catcher for the Philadelphia Phillies. So it's just a way to kind of look at things on a much more even basis. Factors in all sorts of reasons for missing playing time. So it's not just injuries. So I know we've measured DL days for a long time, but this way you just understand like it doesn't really matter if they were injured or suspended, or came up halfway through the season as a rookie, or kind of were up and down due to whatever reason throughout the year. It kind of just takes all of that. It doesn't really matter why. It's just they were not on the active roster. One of the things I'm excited about that isn't really done yet, we'll talk about this at the very end, is that enables us to start really capturing the replacement value for when a player was not on the active roster. That means you could have theory used a different player during that time. And then, like I said, it serves as the background for all of our other metrics. So this is the one I'm probably most excited. It tells it's the least storytelling of the new metrics, but it's actually probably the most overall useful metric. And it's so simple. It's just plate appearances per active week. So when they were like in the majors, in the case of Riley Green, who you'll see at the top of the next slide, or Joey Meneses, I don't remember how to say his name. Like these guys were full-time players, but you would never know it just looking at their plate appearance totals. But something like plate appearances per active week really just floats those players to the top of playing time charts. So I really like it, just this metric, just because it kind of is it's still like total plate appearances, but it's within this unit of measurement 1 week that is very material to fantasy managers. I didn't get much into the prediction game yet with this, but plate appearances per active week is more predictive on a year-to-year basis than is just plate appearances. So this metric is going to be kind of very useful as we think about how to project playing time going forward. Active weeks is the killer. I already kind of covered the last point. So if you look to the next slide, this is when I knew I was onto something, is when I was able to see this. I had no idea that Riley Green was a playing time monster until I saw this. But he got 25.6 plate appearances per active week. When he came up, he was basically literally everyday leadoff hitter for the Tigers. He also got, you can kind of see the 5.7 starts per active week and the 4.49 plate appearances per start. Those are also elite numbers. So those contribute to a really elite plate appearances per active week. It's just that 16 active weeks only led him to have 418 plate appearances. So if you're just looking at who got the most playing time last year, you would never see him. And yeah, the story, like, oh yeah, he was a rookie, he got called up, but like, you don't realize like, oh wow, like he could be like the volume guy until you see like numbers like this. Anyway, so I'll just let you kind of sit with the chart for a minute, but like this is the kind of thing that we can now enable because of controlling for active weeks, and then everything else kind of flows from there.
The fascinating thing, Ed, just to kind of jump in real quick, was the one line you said about the predictability of plate appearances per active week being more predictive than actual plate appearances the following year. That's pretty wild stuff.
All right, you can flip to the next. So now we're kind of going within the world of plate appearances per active week. This is also kind of unique. I would challenge you to name a website, inclusive of Baseball HQ, that actually shows in their data feed games started for hitters. It's not as easy as you think, or at least it wasn't as easy for me. But it's really kind of an interesting thing. Once you get games started, and then you again control for active weeks, you just end up with a very intuitive metric called starts per active week. which just gives you this sense of like, oh, all right, teams play about 6 games per week. This guy starts 5.5 games per week. That seems really, really high. But when you start to see players that only get like less than 5 or like 4.5 or 4 games per week, you start to realize that like maybe they're just not full-time players. So you get a really nice sense of like, is it like a full-time kind of stalwart, or is it, maybe a utility player? More to come in terms of like handedness and things like that. I didn't really address any of that in this initial run at it, but I think there's a lot of more room to explore on starts per active week. It was really funny. I didn't include the chart in this presentation, but if you just look at Houston versus San Francisco, I think Houston had something like 8 players that averaged more than 5 starts per week, and only 13 that averaged more than 2 starts per week. The Giants had 2 players that averaged more than 5 starts per week. And I think even that, it was like 5.0. And 23 different players that averaged 2+ starts per week in their time with the team, kind of over the course of the year. So what I like about this is it kind of like shows in like direct metrics, like team philosophies and how some of these teams might affect fantasy choices. It's also pretty interesting from a position perspective. In the back of the forecaster, we included like position by position charts. Those are sort of descending by plate appearances per start, but if you look at starts per active week, it's also pretty interesting to see where in some positions, like first base, for example, you quickly run out of what you might think of as like full-time players at first. It's like there's 15 that have like 5.4 or so starts per active week, and there's like a little cliff, and then there's really no one else last year anyways that had more than 5 per start, 5 per week. All right, Ryan,
page 69 in the Baseball Forecaster has this chart breakdown that Ed was referring to with Houston and San Francisco. It drives that point home quite well. So
it takes up too much space in the book. The San Francisco
the San Francisco one. Yeah.
Okay, so plate appearances per start. Like, I think everyone knows kind of the axiom, I'm not sure what the word is, about how like with each dip in the batting order, you lose like 15 or 20 plate appearances over the course of the season. But again, it's still kind of hard. There's no such thing as like the average lineup position of that player. You can't like be 1.5, in the lineup. There's no metric for that. But this kind of gets at that concept of it's not just a proxy for lineup position, because there's also like, are you in a strong lineup that turns over a lot such that you get that fifth plate appearance in your game? And on kind of the low side of the metric, there's some players that just get taken out of the game before they can get their 4th plate appearance of the game. So just kind of taking plate appearances and dividing it by, starts, kind of gives us this nice little sense of like who's just getting the most volume on a per game basis. And the chart here kind of shows the value of that, even at the highest levels of plate appearances. Like Yelich, Machado, and Tucker, like they were like full-time players, like 27 active weeks, start like 5.5 games per week. They're always in there. But even still, just given Yelich's kind of position as their 1st/3rd hitter on the Brewers versus Machado's kind of 3rd or 4th on the Padres versus Tucker's wherever the heck the Astros hit him 4th through 6th. That's like, it's like 60 plate appearances. It's like it could be like 2 weeks worth of plate appearances that you didn't really get from your 1st round draft pick last year just because of his plate appearances per start. So this is the kind of stuff we can now kind of factor into our draft thinking and whatnot. So that's kind of it. But the future of playing time measurement is pretty exciting. I'm not going to go through the list, but there's a lot more that we can do with this as the backdrop and as kind of the foundation for some other cool things going forward. So happy to field any questions. Yeah.
Got a comment. Don't share this with any of our league mates as we stream this live on publicly on YouTube for sure. One of the comments, and so there's so much, so much we could go into, but like one of the questions was like, does the manager make a difference? So probably
factors into the team philosophy
Yeah.
equation somewhere.
I would say even more than the manager, I would say the front office philosophy as opposed to anything else. But yeah, page. So in your forecasters at the back of the book. So the research starts around page like 67. So feel free or definitely check that out. And then I think at the end, like maybe 275 in our appendix, we do have broken out. And Ed mentioned this with first base. We have these charts broken out by position, and I believe sorted by plate appearances per active week, which is super useful. And I just always think back to like. The 400 plate appearance guy, is that a Hunter Renfroe who was healthy most of the year and however platooned, and that ceiling for next year of over 400 plate appearances is not much? Or is it someone like you mentioned, like Castellanos? I know he had more than that, but it was more just a fluke injury and he missed a month or 6 weeks or whatever. And what's more predictive of him going back to a full-time role following season? So super interesting stuff, a lot to unpack, but I think for this, it's a great intro. I know I think we'll have more research, and we'll post the research article with I think a little bit even more detail on the site at some point this coming spring. And yeah, like is listed here, there is so much more we could do with that in terms of predictability and projections and that sort of thing. So there is a question that just came up from Brian Feldman. Brian, thanks for watching. Is there a plan for this data to end up in RotoLab? I don't know. Probably not for a while is my guess, until we flesh things out and build it into our projection system. But I don't know. Ray, you're a little bit more in tune with that one than I am. But
Merv hasn't asked yet, but that doesn't mean it's not coming.
yeah,
Merv is this is the time of year when once our projections get up on the site in the next week, Merv starts pulling the data and populating his stuff. We won't have this data embedded into PlayerLink or our tools just yet. We're gonna, there's some obvious tech work that has to happen here to do that. Ed alluded to some of the data gaps that we've got to address first. As you were talking about that, Ed, I was wondering if we can actually get at game starts from the fact that we've been getting lineup feeds for a number of years now, and whether we can do some quick calculations with that. But we're already talking to our tech guys, and I'm sure Merv gets a forecaster, so Merv will be digesting this as well.
And I will say Merv at RotoLab implemented, I mean, he does a lot of new things. He worked with Ron very closely to implement Babs into RotoLab, I guess a year or two ago. So I could definitely see that coming for sure.
And he's very quick. He's very quick to react to these new advancements and innovations. Last year we introduced risk scores for players on Babs, and he was like right on top of it right away. So I would not be surprised if he's banging on your door, Ray, within a couple of weeks.
I would not be surprised either. That's kind of how he rolls, like you said.
Yeah.
At all times of night. I've emailed him with questions like midnight Oregon time, and I get a response back. So very cool. Ed, thank you so much for not only for this research, but coming on and talking through the basics with us. And again, encourage everyone to read that research in the book this year.
Bravo, Ed.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. So I think Ray, Brent, and Ron are going to all tag team this one. If the box, let me know in the comments if the numbers are a little bit hard to read. I can take our ugly mugs off the screen and blow this up a little bit more. But for now, we'll keep us on here. But I will leave this to, I think, Ray, is this your slide on Cole?
Cole is me, yes.
Okay.
So we wanted to talk through a couple of different boxes here. I think we've got 3 pitchers and 3 hitters mixed in here that we'll go through. And I was kind of going through and looking for boxes that are somewhat instructive about how to use them, or can be something of a template to kind of walk through how to read them. I wrote up the Cole one, and I thought I'd just it was just another box. I mean, it's Garrett Cole. You pay a little bit more attention to it in some night in mid-October. And then when Brent edited it from me, he's like, "Wow, you really nailed that." I'm like, I went back and looked the next day. I'm like, "What did I write?" Oh yeah, sure, yeah, I remember now. But the story here that I wanted to highlight was a couple of interesting things that jumped out to me. If you think about the Garrett Cole narrative over a couple of years, or I was even thinking one of the things we do is go back and look at last year's box, always just kind of reorients me to where we were or what we thought last year. And in Cole's case, a year ago in October, at the end of the 21 season, there's a fair amount of question marks there. He had ended the year getting knocked out by the Red Sox in the playoffs. I remember that well. And kind of faded down the stretch, and there was some lack of clarity. Was he a sticky stuff guy that was being impacted by that? There was a lot of chatter about that. There was he was fighting a hamstring injury at the end of the year in 21. And so we came into this year, maybe for an ace type guy with, a few more questions than usual. But now a year later, the picture is completely different. And the green box in xERA and xWHIP kind of summarize that for somebody who had all those question marks, et cetera. There's actually not that much interesting going on here. I mean, he's very good and very consistent, not a lot of variability. Look at the 3 years in New York. Those xERAs and xWHIPs are, moving around in a very narrow range over, what is that, 450 innings over 3 years. I mean, we got a pretty good idea what Garrett Cole is, and it hasn't changed that much, which I thought was really the kind of the first point I wanted to highlight. Give me the next box, the next the blue over on the right there.
Yep.
I highlighted, not only is he very consistent, but he's very darn good too. There's he's just consistently locked in at a high level. Those BPXs are 200 is definitionally twice as good as the league average, and the dollar values move around a little bit. If you jump all the way back over to match up those dollar values with the left-hand column, you'll see that the dollar value correlation with wins is a big part of that. 7 wins in 10 starts or whatever it was in the short season of 2020 was really big. And then, 16 versus 13 and 21 versus 22 probably explains the 28 versus $24 value difference in those 2 years. There's only so much you can do about wins, but he's really good and hanging up a lot of volume, which is the last thing I wanted to highlight here. Those strikeout totals are massive, and you just don't see anybody. There probably aren't that many boxes in this book where for a guy who's got 3 200 inning seasons out of a possible 4, because of course 2020. But that's 246. I mean, that's 850 innings in 5 years. There's, it's really just beyond reproach in sort of every level here, which I think, getting back to my introduction here, kind of surprised me a little bit, just because we've had some questions recently, which leads to the conclusion, Ryan, that this is the safest ace around. I mean, it's almost unimpeachable. It's massive volume. It's good team context. You know exactly what you're going to get. It's just, you look at this box, and the only conclusion you can come to is pay up.
And I think I think the marketplace at this point, let me go back there. I think the marketplace has moved past just ERA at the surface for quite a while now, but it is interesting to see with Garrett Cole, and you can see my kind of mouse there, 2019, that ERA trend, 250, 284, 323, 350, second half of last year, 394. You look at the underlying skills and the volume and the consistency, like Ray just mentioned, and I think it's pretty clear why we come to that conclusion.
And the other knock on him, that I didn't highlight, is over on the right near the blue there. You can see the home run rates that are, to be fair, bad, and the expected numbers are, also bad. But who cares? The results are the results, and he has some days when he comes out and gives up 3 home runs in the first inning, but over 200 innings, it all washes out.
Yep, absolutely. All right, awesome stuff, Ray. I'm going to kick this over to Ron, who's going to talk some Max Kepler.
Max Kepler. One of those guys who I think has been a bit of a disappointment over the last few years. He's battled some injuries, but one of the things I want to point out is there's been a consistent discrepancy between his batting averages and his expected batting averages. His home runs have been kind of all over the place, but they've been pretty. The batting average is really what I want to point out, and he was one of those players who was shifted against 90% of his plate appearances last year. So he was shifted against a lot. But this is the type of guy who you think might see a little bit bump in his batting average going into next year. His contact rate was above average last year at 83%. He's shown that history in the past, so that I don't think that was an outlier. And his hard hit rate, his hard contact has always been a little bit over the mean, so a little bit above average. His BABIP, his hit rate, has always been kind of low, so you always think there could be a potential there of that popping up a little bit as well. And I think all these considerations, also the fact that he was a ground ball hitter last year, which may have been an outlier. We're not sure about that, but hitting the ball on the ground more lends some argument to think that his batting average might pop a little bit. And so he was one of the guys who I did a slight manual adjustment to get his projection up slightly for his batting average up to 242. We're looking at his history. You might think that he would merit that, but between that and his history on the XBA, I think he's one of those guys who could be a sleeper as far as popping up his batting average a little bit. And so that's kind of what we did there. I think we can justify that. I think he could be a 250 hitter next year. I think that could happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, like you said, Ron, you look at that batting average over the last 3 years, and we're projecting anything better than that. I'm not sure what, if you're looking at just 3-year averages, if we don't make that manual adjustment for the shift, I don't think that comes out that way. So one thing that's really interesting with this box too is, you kind of touched on it, but the hit rate stayed super low, and typically he has been that fly ball guy. He did make the adjustment to more ground balls last year. Hit rate didn't budge, probably should have, but so another, I guess, feather in the cap to project a batting average increase for Mr. Kepler. So, all right. Anything else to add on Max Kepler?
No, I think we're good. Let's move on.
Cool. Sticks McKenzie.
Yep.
Brent.
Yep, I got him. This is one that I wrote up, and of course, I think one of the first things we think about with young pitchers like this is they come up with a good year is really how sustainable this is. And the first thing that jumped out at me there is in the green box is just, especially last year, just the volume of innings and of strikeouts that he's given. They're obviously in 21, from 21 to 22, kind of working up his workload. But again, you see his kind of, you him and see the string bean frame, and you're like, he'll never get close to 200 innings. Well, he did really last year almost. And like I said, I think the question then kind of for 23 is that sustainable? And so that's kind of where I started with this box. And, we go on and look at kind of xERA and xWHIP as in comparison with what his ERA and WHIP, which was obviously fantastic, was. And obviously there's some regression there. It's not crazy out of whack, but I think, to expect kind of a sub-3 ERA and a sub-1 WHIP again is probably faulty at this point. And then we move on to kind of his control numbers, especially his expected base on balls. That number really improved both in 2022 and throughout the season. There's a clear trend there. We're obviously splitting things into smaller sample sizes, but the expected base on balls there of 5%, especially in the second half, gives you some comfort that 6% base on ball rate is kind of within his range. And I think in general, we look at his whole second half line there, which is the second part of the what's in the gray box, and just the improvements he made from a skills perspective. The jump up in BPX, the jump up in K rate, the surface stats all got better. The swinging strike rate got better. That's, again, this isn't a a string bean that's getting tired by the end of the year. It doesn't seem like the fact that he pitched well and even better, throughout the second half, I think is really positive. And then the last thing I wanted to point out was just the pretty amazing Dom disaster numbers he had. For those that need a refresher or aren't familiar, this is our pure quality start metric, and it's basically a skill-based sort of game score that we give for pitchers each start, and then these are the percentage of starts in which he dominated via those skills, and the percentage of starts in which he had disaster starts. And that's basically one disaster start throughout the whole year, to have that 40-3 split. And again, I mean, he had more dominating starts percentage-wise in the second half also, which are all pretty positive things. I mean, I still I kind of often approach things like this from a scouting background, and you see that body, and you just think it's and you know that he has had some injury history a little bit in the minors. You just think he won't last, but really the age and the skills really point to staying power, as we said, and just a fascinating box. I had McKenzie on a couple teams last year, knew he was good, but I think in kind of digging into the box, and actually this is one that I happen to write, it just really stood out to me as this guy, from a numbers perspective anyway, is really legit.
Yeah, I think the big thing, like you said, Brent, not only did he make it through the season, he definitely didn't limp to the finish. Basically everything looks better in the second half. So yeah, someone who I definitely whiffed on. I bought too much into that string bean thing, and he's not going to last, and definitely wrong on that. So.
Now dovetailing it back to Ron's points though about the new rules, fewer games against Detroit and Kansas City for him though.
That is fair. That's certainly something to consider too. I mean, for sure. I think you had mentioned that in our back and forth in the process, and it does pan out. He had some really fantastic starts against some of the weaker teams in his division. So
throwing cold water, Ray, on McKenzie. I don't
Other
know,
side
man.
of the coin, guy.
Come
There he
on.
goes.
Boo. All right. Switching gears, battery mates position wise, I guess. Dalton Varsho.
Yeah, I got Varsho too. I think he's obviously someone that's interesting topic. This time last year, we were all kind of enamored with this catcher that could steal bases, and was seeming to get a lot of playing time. He performed well, obviously, and has moved up, draft boards this year, and is part of this kind of whatever catcher renaissance, let's say, as far as at least via ADP. So it's interesting to kind of look into his box and kind of see what's there. Certainly the power metrics are legit. The 44% fly ball rate, the expected, both the power and the expected power, the 158 is outstanding. 16% homers for fly ball. So it's certainly, I mean, he's making good contact, has a swing and an approach that's going to lend itself to power for sure. I think the question, is kind of, in looking at this box, is can the stolen bases really be trusted? On the left, the two single green boxes are, 16 stolen bases, but only 7 expected stolen bases, which is one of our which is one of our
that's an
metrics.
Ed Decaria special.
Which is an Ed Decaria special. That's right.
Expected stolen bases.
Yep. And then the green box on the right, you see his speed skills are not outstanding. The speed metric is 90, and the stolen base percentage is 73, which is okay, but it's not, it's not something it's not a strong metric to kind of, or group of metrics to kind of hang your hat on there. I think if I think it's fair to wonder, or just be open to, are we going to get what kind of stolen bases are we going to get out of Varsho? And if the speed dries up a little, the something else that stands out is his kind of struggling some against left-handed pitching. That's an OPS plus versus left of 77, again, where 100 is league normal, and contact rates are not great either. And there you see in the second half too, kind of dipped down really close to that 70 percentile contact rate. If that continues, we know, for right now anyway, the Diamondbacks have tons of, a lot of options, young outfielders there, and of course Kelly behind the plate too, to kind of job share. I think it's feasible to just be aware that he could lose some at bats against lefties because of that. I think in general, it's just a mixed bag. There's lots to like. I think, but we wrap it up with kind of, below average speed and mediocre stolen base percentage, and a possibility of lost plate appearances against left-handers as concerns. And I think when some people in the chat have talked about some of these others, when you put that in context as kind of, right now he's pretty much the second catcher off the board in some of these early drafts, third or fourth round, just seems to be, I don't know, a little more risk there when you take all this into account, then I think perhaps some of the market is recognizing. So just found that interesting with Varsho.
Varsho is going in NFBC drafts early on 45th overall. So in a 15-team league, you're looking at the end of the third round there. And again, that's a two-catcher format, so it gets bumped up a little.
And obviously, there's the positive tier too is the flexibility he gives you, with catcher and outfield. That's certainly a plus also. But I think best case scenario most of the time, because of what he's supposed to give you with stolen bases and the power, you'll want to play him a catcher if possible.
And just one last kind of quick, interesting thing to kind of tie this back to Ron's intro is that 73% stolen base metric, that success rate with the bigger bases is, and again, I don't know, but I'm just throwing it out there, is someone like Varsho, who's kind of at the fringe of what is kind of a positive ROI on your stolen bases, which I think is like 75-ish%, something like that. Yeah. Would Varsho be helped more by those kind of bigger bases and the perception of a better running game? Again, don't know, but just something interesting to throw out there.
Yeah, I'd look at his stolen base attempt percentage at 18%. Normally, if somebody doesn't get at least 20%, he's not getting the green light enough for it to really make a difference.
All right, cool. Who we got next? Mr. No Hitter, Reed Detmers.
That's me.
All right, Ray.
So this was interesting in that this is a good opportunity for us to show the value of the first half, second half splits, and sometimes the differences that these show. Detmers, you might remember, had the no-hitter, as Ryan alluded to, but that was like in May. And other than that, his first half, as you can see here, overall was pretty bad. And he ended up the end of June getting sent down briefly. And it was the most successful minor league sort of reboot that I can remember since it reminded me that Max Scherzer had one in his first year in with the Tigers in like 2010. We went down, had like one start, blew away like 18 guys, and they're like, okay, you're fine. Come on back up. I mean, it's kind of the exact same thing that happened with Detmers. They went down. I read an article when I was writing up his box here that they tweaked his slider, changed his release point, got more break on the slider, and everything kind of fell into place. And you can see how dramatic the effect was because I highlight the swinging strike gain there in green, and then you go over to the left and you see the impact on strikeout rate and strikeout minus walks. And to just show you how dramatic it is, that first half, 10% K minus BB, if you jump to the back of the book to the cheaters bookmark, which I also put right below the box here, and pulled out, you always want to check that cheaters bookmark to reorient yourself to what the league average is, what the good and bad numbers are that you want to be looking for here. Here's Detmers as an abject example. His first half strikeout minus walk rate was at the bad level, and at the 10% that you want to avoid. And after he adjusted the slider and came back after one start in the minors with this new pitch, he was now up to 18%, which is the best level. The shop at this, you want to shop at this tier level. So that's the impact of what one change to a pitch mix can have. The rest of this second half, even with that new pitch, got kind of weird, which I kind of wanted to also walk through. You can see from an ERA perspective, he gained a lot of ground. 3.04 ERA, but the 130 whip is, actually pretty bad and ironically way worse than it was in the first half with the old pitch. If you go over in yellow to the right, you can kind of see the weird, what we call, sort of the, shorthand, the luck factors that led to that. The whip is high because he had a 35% hit rate, but the ERA stayed low because he didn't give up any home runs. So he was able to strand a lot of those runners. So when these metrics get kind of, pointing in opposite directions like that, the thing I always want to do is go back over to BPX and look over on the right in orange there as the sort of one line, one cell summary. What do we have here? And you can see there, just how much better from a skills perspective the second half was from the first half. He was, half of league average in the first half and, nearly 20% better in the second, which leads to the conclusion. One more click there, Ryan. Or did I not leave it there? Oh, there it is. Yeah, so we threw in an upside of a 3.25 ERA and maybe 200 Ks because that swing strike rate is so strong now. Obviously there are some workload things to figure out there. We've got him at basically as you can see in the projection line, 160 innings, 163 strikeouts. So that's a strikeout inning rate. Maybe he gets a little bit better than that. Maybe he gets more up toward 175 innings if they let him carry that workload. So those upside that you catch in the box, a reminder that those are intended to be somewhat speculative. But this is now, I think, he's got that kind of ceiling now that he's got the fastball slider mix, carving up hitters the way it does.
One quick question I've got with, and Detmer is kind of the example of this, but just kind of a broader base with pitchers is, so Ray, you did mention, not really, I guess the change in pitch mix, but the kind of the reshaped slider, that sort of thing. It looks like our projections are, at least for Detmer's, weighted a little bit more to that second half version of him. In general, for pitchers that do have like a pitch mix change or something in mid-season like this, is that something that we are, I don't know if overriding is the right word, but is that something we're waiting a little bit more for pitchers?
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that, like, when I'm tweaking the projection before passing it up to Ron for final approval, that'll lead me to, put the thumb a little more heavily on the scale, toward the second half over the first. Of course, there's a leap of faith there that, Detmer shows up at camp in late February and still remembers how to throw that slider, right? So, but assuming that happens, yeah, we're making the assumption that he doesn't actually forget everything he learned over the course of the winter and can come back and pick up where he left off.
Don't party too hard this offseason, Reed. Remember what you did in the second half. All right. Last but not least on the player boxes. Thanks, Ray, for that one. That was really good stuff. I think I had this box, but Eloy Jimenez, I think Brent's going to talk through it.
Just quickly. I mean, I think, I put the little extra box up top there because there's just really, you can't start talking about Jimenez without talking about the DL days and that F health grade. Almost 200 DL days in the past 2 seasons. So it's really a huge caveat to what we're going to say. I mean, you just need to kind of bring that up. But there is some exciting stuff here going on in 2022, especially. He had the best walk and contact rates of his career, and of course the best eye of his career. Kind of summing that up. The walks, especially, you can see a positive trend there, and while his contact rate's bouncing up and down a little bit, certainly. Finishing the year with the 75% is really good. And in that second half, which most of them, which is almost 300 plate appearances there, he ticked it up to 76%. I think second is just like the insane sort of hard contact number there, 144. Again, hard contact for us is a kind of a merging of contact rate, which is 75% is pretty good, but then also of hard hit rate, which is something that is not StatCast hard hit rate, but something similar that we get from our stat provider, and a 144 in that HCTX column is just outstanding. And then you match that with the StatCast based metrics here of the QBAB. Especially that exit velocity, that elite exit velocity, which is the first character there, the A, and the 15% barrel rate. Again, having both kind of hard contact, that HCTX, which is kind of a Baseball HQ metric, and having that confirmed by the StatCast data too is always a big positive. So the big dude's hitting the ball hard. And then finally, just the strength that he's showing, again, via expected home runs per fly and home runs per fly and expected power. Again, those are indexes set on 100 scale. So he's 43% above average for expected power. And, the fact that he's in the low 20s there, in home run for fly ball rate, and has been around that level for his career is very positive. So his is another one that we, with kind of that data set of almost 300 plate appearances in the second half, say that there's an upside here of 40 home runs. Again, you can't draft him on that. And again, going back to the first thing, that F health grade is for real. But if you want to speculate a bit, as one of your riskier players, this might be a good spot to do that.
Very good. And yeah, I think I threw that up 40 home run. One of the big data points, at least for me, when I was looking at the box was, and you probably can't see my little mouse in the bottom left there, that 292 number in the second half for Eloy at least tells us that he finished the season healthy.
Mm-hmm.
He had 300 plate appearances in the second half. I'd much rather, for someone with an F health grade with the injury history of Eloy, I'd rather have those plate appearances be in the second half than flipped and he ended the season hurt. So
Yep.
Yeah, back on the last question you were asking me, Ryan, this, just as I'm sitting here looking at this box, this is a place where I feel like I wish I had put the thumb on the second half even a little bit harder. Like the that small first half line, that 96 plate appearances, which was mostly on rehab, as I recall. Obviously as you go across that line is really bad. Like he was really, they left him down in the minors for a little while to shake the rust off there. And you can see why they were not in a hurry to call him up when he was hitting a $189 with a 67% ground ball rate. But those numbers are still leaking into the projection a little bit. And like even with the ground ball, line drive, fly ball split, like given the 2021 48 48% number and the second half 48% number. That probably shouldn't be all the way up at 50%. It's the 67 that's causing that. So that might be a place where, as I'm prepping the site projections this week, I need to go do a little bit of adjusting. Maybe the up 40 needs to have come off a base of 28 or 29 home runs rather than 26.
All right, couple minutes for Q&A. Great stuff overall, gentlemen. Packed a lot of stuff into just over an hour here. So, got a question from Dan first. This is about Lima, and one of the things I know we did this year was we updated the admittedly slightly outdated thresholds for what Lima was. So he was asking, are those new Lima thresholds, are those accounted for in this year's player boxes?
Yes, they are. The letter grades and the pitcher boxes are based on the criteria that Ron put in this sidebar in the introduction.
There you go. Oh, were you going to add anything there, Ron? Sorry.
Nope. Just agreeing.
Okay. Question here from Eric, and as we all pull up our forecaster pages to see where Sean Murphy and William Contreras, what I know, and so I did a show with Jock Thompson who had Sean Murphy's forecaster box. Jock was very high on Sean Murphy and put an upside, I believe, of 275 with 20 home runs. I want to say maybe 25 off the top of my head.
Yep.
But I'll throw this out there to anyone who wants to chime in. Does that trade move the needle for anyone in terms of playing time or skills?
I guess I'm worried that Murphy's going to play a lot less in Atlanta because he was gonna DH a ton in Oakland and get 600 PAs, and he may lose a lot of plate appearances per average week in this transaction.
Yeah, regardless of the trade, I don't see how he at best stays even on plate appearances. It's pretty hard for a catcher to get more than the 612 or whatever he had last year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the flip side would be he's got a real lineup now around him, and doesn't, and the park factors are going to be better also. But I also agree with the plate appearance question. So it's I don't know if it totally balances out, but I think they're factors to keep in mind.
Yep. And I think, I'm in tune with what's on Twitter and social media and that sort of thing. And to Ed's point about the playing time measurement and things like that, I think kind of the hot take with Murphy was, oh yeah, he's out of Oakland. He's, that's a great move in terms of lineup and park. Well, yeah, but will Atlanta play him as much as Oakland did, running him out there every single day? So,
probably not.
Right. Another catcher question, Tyler Stevenson is a big question mark for me. And this kind of also goes into playing time too, with Stevenson being catcher eligible, but also playing some first base. Lots of talent, but can't stay healthy. What do you see for Stevenson in 2023? Trying to see who had his box. Brandon Cruz had Tyler Stevenson's box. So not on the show. I will say, I mean, if anyone wants to chime in, but I will say we ended his box with not as close to a breakout as he might appear. The power skills particularly were kind of underwhelming for Tyler Stevenson. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add there for.
Yeah, I remember seeing this box when it was getting passed up the editing chain, and my default state was wanting to be excited about Stevenson. I think I had him last year, and as as John notes in the question, he was really good until he got hurt, and the injury was, as I recall, foul ball off his collarbone or something super random like that. I wanted to like it more, but from the skills perspective, it kind of just wasn't there. And as John also notes, it's not the first injury. There's a lot of, the skills in the box weren't as exciting as I wanted them to be. And there's a lot of small sample stuff going on. So, I mean, he's still at an age where he could hang up a big year and deliver on what he's flashed before, but it's tough to extrapolate that for a catcher.
Cool. That's all. Unless anyone has any last minute questions, that's a wrap. We've been going 75, 80 minutes so far tonight. So fantastic stuff, gentlemen. We will be, I guess, getting projections up on the website this weekend and going from there. So happy draft season. We will also have this archived on our YouTube page as well. So obviously, if you're listening to this point, you know that, but it'll be on our YouTube page if anyone wants to look back at that. So with that, so we got some more comments coming in just saying thanks to everyone. Got my book today, so that's great to hear. I'll go check my mailbox after this and see if I got one. I'm still on the outside looking in there, but
Did you get a tracking number yet, Ryan?
no, I just trust it. I don't look that stuff up. It'll come. My mailman retired 2 weeks ago, so maybe there's a bigger issue.
There you go.
See if I'm getting other mail. But
I've had more than one funny exchange in our customer service inbox this week with people going to great lengths to track down their books that were like shipped to their old house and stuff like that. And, calling their neighbors, and it's been pretty funny.
Ray, you didn't sign certain copies that came to people's door.
I would have had to go to Fun to Lock, Wisconsin for that, which would have been kind of tough. But I'll sign them at First Pitch, Florida for anybody who wants.
There we go. Great segue. Anything else anyone else wants to add at this point? Good to go. All right. Thanks again, Ray, Ron, Ed, Brent. Great stuff. Thanks for all the listeners. Have a fantastic holiday season filled with forecaster reading.
Yes.
And we'll catch you on the flip side. The next time we'll do this, we'll be with Brent and probably Chris on the minor league side. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll catch you later.
Thanks, readers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.